Hey, brother, how are you?
I'm great. Good to see you, man.
And good to see you. It's been a while. You are the first person I interviewed years ago, a few years ago. My first
Cool.
ever podcast episode.
hmm
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. You are in Peru right now, correct?
Yeah.
How'd
Yeah, in the
you
Sacred
end up
Valley
there?
near Cusco. Yeah, my wife and I met here like 5 or 6 years ago. We didn't really connect back then. We just like exchanged contact info, and then many years later we reconnected. She was on my podcast. We fell in love. She moved to Thailand. Then we moved to Mexico. Thailand to be with me because that's where I was. We went to Mexico, and then we came back here because we liked it. So we're here for now.
Nice, nice. I hear a lot of people moving to Mexico and Thailand and Indonesia, but Costa Rica. In Peru, people would just go for hike, retreat, plant medicine, and come back. But what attracted you to Peru?
I mean, the first time I came just because I had friends living here, and then my now wife had already been living here for many years, and yeah, I mean, we came back to visit. She left some stuff here with friends. We just came to pick it up and visit some of her friends, but then we realized we like it here a lot better than Mexico, So we were like, yeah, it's kind of got everything we like. Got a nice house. We raising ducks and bunnies now, so yeah, I mean, it's just a good community here. I mean, a lot of things I like. I'm not. I don't do ceremonies or plant medicine myself anymore. Not that I never will again, but like, yeah, I'm here for more just to live. The normal stuff is what appeals to me.
Nice. In
Mhm.
Cusco, correct? Yeah,
Near Cusco, yeah.
I was in Tingo Maria 2 years ago.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really beautiful experience in Peru. So tell me, what have you been up to since the last time we chatted? I
Um.
see. Yeah, I see your post on Instagram.
Uh-huh.
You have a child, a
Yeah, I
beautiful
have a
baby
2 year
girl.
old, and another one's on the way in May. Yeah, I mean, those are the big things. I don't know if I don't think I was married either last time we spoke.
No.
So yeah, I mean, pretty big life changes for me. Um, yeah, and everything else, still doing the podcast, all that stuff.
Nice. And your main core is working with men.
hmm
You help them develop and work on themselves and work on their psyche, so that I'll let you answer that question. What specific areas that you focus on, men?
Yeah, I mean, the things that most guys reach out to me for are help with relationships or dating, or more recently, life purpose. And we've spoken about it before, but I've been very inspired by Jung, and understand the unconscious and our drives. But ultimately, what I think has any man reach out to a coach is like something going on with women or purpose, or women or money, to even bring it down to like the most base level. And maybe that triggers us to explore deeper into our unconscious and what's going on under the hood and things like that. But it's usually one of those two things, that drives us to invest time in, or seek out help in working on ourselves.
Hmm. And you also speak about the relationship to one's parents or caregivers, specifically mothers. Can you go a little deeper into that
Well, I
aspect?
mean, yeah, everything. I mean, a lot of our personality and how we are comes from nurture and how we are affected. And of course, both of our parents are our biggest imprints, or whoever raised us, when we were really young. So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of men and women too, but I mostly work with men, are affected by what we might call a mother wound, or a father wound. These kinds of imprints. Like for a man, like his a first straight man, a lot of his relationships with women, or his patterns in relationships with women, were are affected by initial imprints from how his mother treated him. That's not always the case, but it is one of the large things. Like when you see things like nice guy syndrome or Peter Pan syndrome or any of these like kind of newish terms that people use often, they often come back to something going on with the guy's mom. And the other side of masculinity, the harder parts, like our drive, our relationships to money, to conflict, to purpose, to accomplishment, to status. A lot of that does come from our relationship with our father, or the more masculine side of our early childhood upbringing. So I think it's interesting to be aware of those things. When I'm working with guys one on one, I try not to go too, you know, uh, I just try to spend not too much time on discussing the past so much. Maybe we identify, okay, this is where it comes from, but like, you know, going, I try to focus on the present and changing patterns rather than reinforcing old ones.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really deep work. And when it comes to mothers, is it the way they relate to themselves, our interactions with them, or how they react to even their partners? How does it affect the psyche?
Well, it could be a lot of things. I think the one that's the most easily observable is if you have a certain pattern in your relationships with women or lack of relationships with women, how you perceive women, and then therefore how they react to you. A lot of it can come to how your mom treated you. So, um, a lot of guys have this kind of unhealthy attachment, or they grew up kind of disempowered around their feminine authority figure. So this might mean they end up deferring to women too easily, which can lead into what we now call nice guy syndrome. It can also uh, create some resentment. So like guys who, another term like the Madonna whore complex, where you separate love and sex, like guys who can't, get it up with a woman or they can't become turned on with a woman that they feel emotional attachment to, and they can't feel emotional attachment with a woman that they're sexually turned on by, like they're mutually exclusive. A lot of times there's some mommy issues in there where like, obviously a guy doesn't want to think sexually about his mother. And if his mother's presence, whether it's, literally going on as an adult or not, if his memory of his mother or his mother's presence is taking up space in, in his heart is one way to put it, or like the part of his psyche that is reserved for romantic attachment, it makes sense that those things would be split. And then there's other things too that it can affect, like self-worth or your internal confidence when it comes to relating to women. Like guys who have a lot of anxiety, maybe they just never got that approval in a healthy way, or they had an anxious mother who smothered them and they wanted to get away, and with a woman who's not their mother, they act weird, let's say.
Yeah, I have seen. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen a wide range of men and how they relate to women. I mean, I myself had the had the phase where I was too much of a nice guy as well. Just that
Mm-hmm.
also relates to the culture I grew up in, the East Asian household.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things in South Asian culture that is challenging for men. I think one of those, like, I've had clients who are from India. They're also Muslim, but I mean, I think that even for non-Muslim South Asian guys, like, there's a lot of like, it's part of the culture to kind of defer to your mom. And I've had a lot of clients actually, from of Indian descent or South Asian descent, let's say, who it's challenging growing up in the West or seeking self improvement from a Western perspective, English speaking perspective, and reconciling that with the culture of their mother. Like, I want to go after these kinds of women, or I want to date in a certain way, or I want to have a certain kind of relationship. I want to be a free man, as is like a big part of Western culture. But how do you reconcile that when you're raised in a culture where your mother kind of has the final say in a lot of things? And I've seen this, like, I have a client who uh, went through all of the traditional the expected cultural aspects of getting married. He's Muslim as well, but his mother didn't like his choice of spouse, and it's like this huge rift in his family that I honestly, even though like my father's from that part of the world, it's kind of foreign to me because I grew up in the United States. But I was like, wow, that's like a really powerful thing, and you can imagine how heavy it is for a man, starting to explore his romantic side, his sexuality, all of these things. Like when the culture reinforces, mom tells you what to do.
Hmm. Yeah, it's from a personal experience. Um, yeah, and talking about the fathers, also you related some aspects of our personality related to our direct relationship to our fathers. You specifically spoke about money, wealth. Um, I'm curious how that is connected, and also um, how does what are the main aspects um, that or the behaviors that your father um, displays as a child that could affect your, say, confidence, purpose, you're able to express, or are they somehow related?
Yeah, I mean, in a similar way, you know, your dad or whoever the male role, your primary male role model when you're really young is your imprint or your literal model, right? Actually, having become a father recently and spent a lot more time around children and other parents, and also my own child, obviously, I have noted. I mean, I've learned some new things. Like it's taken it kind of out of theory and into more practice in my life. Where one of the things that my wife and I have been noticing is that, and I guess maybe this is all parents eventually realize is that children act differently around their fathers than their mothers. It's assuming that the mothers and fathers have like let's say stereotypical or traditional role energies, let's say, or they take on the mother's more nurturing, the father's a little more stern. That kids act out more with their mothers because, and one of the justifications for this is they know that they're going to get unconditional love from their mother, whereas their father is going to show disapproval, is more likely to show disapproval. And we've seen this with some of our friends who are single moms raising their kid, is that it does seem either the woman has to take on a masculine role, she basically fulfills that role, which people can do obviously, or the kid kind of feels groundless because there's not like a presence who is enforcing discipline. It's not even direct discipline. Obviously, with really little kids, you don't necessarily have to directly discipline. It's more like uh, establishing the perimeter, if you will. Like there's not like a presence that they know is keeping them physically safe. They know is also uh, kind of providing the culture, or the term I use is spiritual perimeter. Like there's the material perimeter, like making sure your family doesn't get eaten and they have enough food. But there's the spiritual perimeter of like kind of guiding the culture of the family, or the vision of the family, or like the internal norms, the jokes, the language, the style, the customs of the family. And this seems to, I mean, this is more of a male tendency, right? So like kids without that strong father figure, they it seems, I'm learning this right now, it seems that they feel like they have to establish their own perimeter earlier because they're not getting a cue from a strong masculine presence. And we all know the things of like cultural stereotypes of a boy who grows up without a strong male role model. There's certain challenges that come with that. He might go into extreme behavior, he might not, but hopefully can find some sort of male presence that's benevolent if his father isn't around or his father's not fulfilling that.
Hmm. Well said. Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I enjoy watching the stories of you working out with your kid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really sweet.
But she's the perfect progressive overload tool, right? Because she started off like 6 pounds. Now she's 25. Just got to keep up my pull-ups with her.
Mm. What are some of your challenges, or some of the things you realized about yourself, about your fatherly nature that was some very new to you? some self
Well,
perception.
the biggest challenge, which I wasn't expecting at all, was kind of the identity death. Like I had a certain view of myself, an identity, let's say, a certain kind of ego or persona that really fit my bachelor life really well, and it just didn't fit family life. And I'm honestly still kind of going through this of like, who am I to myself? Who am I? How do I present myself to the world? All of this is in my head, obviously, right? But I was actually kind of surprised at how much this becoming a father affected that, and that was quite challenging. And then there's these other, like, you could call them like spiritual things, like the reminder to be present. Like anytime I lose my patience, it's one thing to lose my patience with my wife, let's say, because she's an adult, and I can like justify, like, oh yeah, she did this, and therefore I'm justified in being mad or losing my cool. But when I lose my cool with my daughter, it's like, well, she's a baby. Like, it's never actually, there's no justification, which then translates back to my wife, and I'm like, well, if there's no justification, if every time I lose my cool with my daughter, I have to admit to myself I fucked up. Well, there's something in that too of like, well, if I lose my cool with my wife, regardless of what the situation is, that's kind of a fuck up by me too. And it's kind of like these, like, you're getting this reflection, this feedback. And then there's also like the kind of the day-to-day thing of like, if I'm not present, if if I'm like getting flustered over things that I shouldn't be flustered. Basically, I'm not being grounded. I can see how it affects my daughter if she's in my presence, which is a lot. Like these little things, it's like she's absorbing, like she's getting imprinted by me, right? So if I'm kind of wrapped up in my insecurities, I'm sure it's affecting her. And sometimes it's very directly observable. Like if I'm, getting flustered over things or frustrated with life, I can see how it affects her emotionally. Like she's just absorbing myself and her mother. So, um, yeah, it's kind of like this external thing to show me how present and how grounded I am moment to moment.
Hmm. Yeah, they say they're like sponge brains. They have
Hmm.
the capacity to absorb. And also, I'm sure your what effect did it have in your the aspect of your masculine archetype, the one who is the aspect connected to sort of gathering and hunting? Are you more focused on creating more wealth, say more resources for your family, for your kids, just looking more further into the future than before her birth? What's has that?
Yeah, and I think, well, I don't know exactly how much of this is fatherhood and how much of it is just growing up.
Mm,
I mean, I'm sure fatherhood definitely, kind of forces you to grow up in terms of mindset. But yeah, I am thinking in term, ever since she was born, time seems to have sped up in the same way that, when you're 10, a year it feels like a long time. When you're 20, it feels like less. But when you have a kid, years go by. These last 2 years have gone by very fast. So of course, I'm thinking in terms of like life planning and estate planning, and I want to leave a certain amount for my kids, and I want to also I want to have a lot of kids, and that requires a certain amount of wealth. So yeah, I guess focus and more respons I mean, it is literally more responsibility. So yeah.
mhm.
And it is like, in terms of archetypes, it's, fatherhood is the king archetype, or the king archetype represents fatherhood, let's say. So like, one of the things that I've been confronting in myself is, where do I blame? Where do I feel like it's someone else's responsibility? Which maybe I've always had that, maybe everyone has that kind of tendency at times, but within my household, there's no one I can pass blame to legitimately. If I really want to be the king of my home, metaphorically. So yeah, it's kind of like the my friend Omer Pani, who teaches domination and submission. This is his line, so I want to give him credit. Um, People say that power, with great power comes from great responsibility, but the reverse is also true. Like when you're taking more responsibility, you also have more power. And I'm experiencing both sides of it, right? I have responsibility, but I also have authority, and I better use it well because I have dependence.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I have recently seen that with a friend of mine. He's a really driven person naturally, You know, I think just sold his company, or he's doing well for himself and is quite always driven, always looking out for new ventures. But recently, I found out the girl he's dating is going to be, is with a child, and he's a completely different person now. He's the level of his drive, it's much more grounded and more one pointed. Like, I have to build this for my kid and my future wife. So most of the time, a lot of our conversations in our meet were sort of discussion on that aspect. So I found that subtle shift in that part of his personality. So that's what I felt, that yes, if you once you know that you are going to be a father, there's a huge shift in your priorities and the meaning that life gives you. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Are you planning on having kids?
It's especially in our culture. I don't know how it is with your parents, but in our culture, they right after you get married is they're looking for a grandchild. It's like, when is it coming, when is it coming? There's like, but I myself, yes, I do like children. I have let's say one, two, three, four, five niece and nephews. So three nieces, two nephews. And whenever I see them, I do, I'm talking to them on the phone. It just lights me up. And it always, like, even though they're not my children, I'm like, what can I do for them? And I wish it's also, there's a sense of, I think we all, a lot of men have it, that for continuing our bloodline, like, the kings had it back in the day. Continuing our name from, started back in our ancestors, but how do we pass this line, this inner drive of survival? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is this primal thing to to be fruitful and multiply, to have progeny, to be the cool ancestor of some people. It just always, you know, I mean, that's kind of, there's nothing more natural than that, right? So of course it hits all the, our evolved reward circuits for fulfillment, you know. So you're gonna have kids soon, it sounds like.
I hope so. I hope so. I just have to. My wife lives in Bangladesh, so I
Ah,
have
okay.
to. Yeah. I
You're
need
still in
to
New
meet her
York?
here. I am in New York. Yeah, so I see her maybe twice or thrice a year when I fly back, and then we spend a little time, maybe 20 days or maybe a month. But the challenge is, how do I set up my life so that I can be with her? Sort of, if you want to build a family, you have to, stay with someone for a while. Like, you have to be grounded and have consistent, growing relationship. So that is something I'm trying to figure out right now on a personal basis, just because of
You wouldn't
work
you
and
wouldn't
immigration.
go back to Bangladesh, huh? You want to bring her to New York?
Right now, it will. If I do bring her to New York, it will take maybe a year, year and a half. But then, I want to go back to Bangladesh just to, fill it out. But then I have a job here. So, but what you are doing right now, I think it's a really um, beautiful way to live. You're living out in nature. You have animals. You're working
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah, I went back to New York for the first time since the pandemic started, this just last September. And, it's easy to have a lot of ideologies over this and that and whatever. And I'm kind of guilty of like maybe being over idealistic sometimes. So I'm saying this kind of as a caveat. But when I went back to New York, it seems so strange that people live this way. And I grew up in New York. Like I still have spent most of my life in New York. I'm 35. I've spent multiple decades in New York. but it's so strange. It's one thing, it just felt so foreign and artificial to be in a box with a bunch of other people, to need so much money to just get by. And this is not, this is not to diss your living situation, but it's like, I kind of just want to say this because to everyone I know, when you spend a little bit of time in another living situation, the, the urban Western one seems so strange to me now. And actually, it might just be that I was like just so there's a bit of culture shock. Even like crossing the street, I kind of forgot how to do it. Like I was spending so much time like looking back and forth of like, wait, this is like requiring a lot of brain processing. Whereas like when you're in nature, you just walk around, right? You avoid a predator if you see something snarling, but like, and don't try to fall in water. Like that's about it. Like, you kind of have this. It's just easier on your brain or your cognitive ability. I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the city is designed so that we are mostly tapped into just one the the strenuous part of our nervous system versus in nature. I was listening to this podcast of Dr. Andrew Huberman, the Huberman
Mm-hmm.
podcast. So he talks about different topics related to health and longevity and science, and this one was about EMF and heat that is coming from your phone. So
Hmm.
the research has shown that if you put your phone in your pocket near your groin, it lowers your testosterone. Just the
Yeah.
heat coming from this device, and imagine, like, yeah, it's not hidden that EMF is certain radiation is absorbed on your skin and has detrimental effects on your body. But
Totally.
we're surrounded. It's sound, light pollution, traffic, you know continuous bombardment of stimuli,
Yeah.
air pollution.
And you see a lot
It's
of people have trouble conceiving when they want to have a baby. And, it is kind of, I mean, Ted Kaczynski called this like a couple of decades ago and in a very extreme way, but a lot of technological progress is a war on nature and a war on like uh, our evolutionary fulfillment circuits. Like, what the things that are supposed to give us rewards are being taken further and further away. It's like, I've had this discussion a few times with people where like, you talk about like, oh, where do you want to live in the United States? And people talk about Portland's so great because, it's all this nature. There's these hiking trails. Like this is culture of hiking. People get out of work early so they could go hike. It's awesome. But you still have to drive 30 minutes to get to nature. Like if you live in Portland, whereas a lot of people in the world, like me, there's a hiking trail right outside. And this is not to, say like, oh, my way of living is better, but this is an option, especially now. We're kind of getting back to this place where so much work is remote that if you just pick a country, you can live on the beach, you can support a family on one salary in the right part of the world. It's these things are becoming available to us again because of remote work, let's say.
Mhm, mhm. And how is your days like? How much of what's the structure like of your day? What are
Yeah,
it's
well,
like?
as of the last few months, I get up at 5. Uh, my daughter gets up around 7, and I let my wife sleep in. So I try to have 2 hours to myself. Sometimes I get up at 5:30, whatever. But like where I read, journal, and do some sort of movement, like physical movement. So around 7, my kid gets up. We spend, and we do breakfast together. We feed the bunnies and the ducks, and that's part of our morning routine. My wife gets up around 8:30. On school days, I take my kid to school most of the days to be there at 9. Then I hit the gym. The gym is right next to her school, and then I go to a cafe and I write for 4 to 5 hours, and that's basically my work day. And then yeah, I go back and family time or read or hang out or do social things.
Hmm. That's wonderful. Does
Yeah.
um is the locality Spanish, or you have English
Well, there's
speaking
a lot
people
of
as well?
expats here. My Spanish is getting better. It's okay. I can't really have like a conversation yet, but I can I can do transactional Spanish and, understand basic things that people say to me. But there's a lot of expats here. There's a lot of people, like you said, come here for plant medicine or other hippie things. And there's
Hmm.
a pretty solid community here. And it's a small
And
town, which I really enjoy. You know, there's like only a couple hundred. It kind of feels like high school. As a couple hundred people, you kind of meet new people, but you see a lot of the same people, and it's easier to build relationships in a small, small area.
And what about your food? Do you grow your own food, or you?
Well, that's what the ducks are for. Because we
Okay.
decided to get a bunny for my daughter as a pet. And then I read somewhere that rabbits are like the most sustainable form of meat. And then I was like, well, can I kill a rabbit? Do we want to raise rabbits for food? I have to, think about it. And then at the place where we bought the rabbit, there's like an animal market where people buy live animals for food. They sell rabbits there for food also. We got rabbits as a pet. I was like, no, we're getting ducks as food. I mean, it's my favorite kind of meat. So I'm raising them, yeah, for meat basically. But yeah, a lot of the food we get, the butter, the milk, alpaca we can buy from our neighbors. People, it's very kind of autarkic here, or a lot of people are self-sustaining, which is really interesting. Also, I was just speaking with someone like this is the first place I've been where obviously there's a wealth disparity between the expats and the locals because of the currency difference. But this is the only place where the locals are not eager to work because most families own their own land and they grow their own food. So maybe they have a job or maybe they have a business, but they don't really need the money ever. So it's like people are like, it's interesting. People are not like, in Thailand and Mexico, like anytime someone can get a job from a foreigner, they want the job because it's usually, it pays well. But here it's like, yeah, I don't. I mean, either way, my family's fed, so I'll fix your roof when I feel like it, kind of thing, which has been interesting. But I do like it. It's a little bit inconvenient. I'm still in kind of the Western mindset of like things have to happen at a certain time and whatever.
Mhm. You're a great experiment of people, the expat living lifestyle in your territory, and where you're still learning the language. Um, but yeah, it's pretty cool that you have ducks. My mom has a have a little, like, roof deck. Back in Bangladesh, she has a little cage, and I think a couple of ducks. She was telling me the other day that some new ducklings hatched, and she was super excited.
Cool.
She has some pigeons, and we have a little farm, cows and goats. So
Hmm.
the rural life, it's it's a really, really, it's totally different from, like, just the um, your reality in where you're living. For me, I mean, I grew up more of city in the city life, not like my parents.
Hmm.
um, I do feel energized when I'm out there, seeing the animals, and I imagine, like, what would it be like to what does it like to live as a farmer, or like someone who's actually, having a relationship with their animals in a sustainable way. um,
Yeah, it's an interesting. It is obviously a trade off. Like I do want my children to have access to a city because in rural life, you're not going to get the best parts of like cultural advancement. Like if she wants to learn an instrument or music or theater or dance, or like even ever since I've left urban environments, like it's hard to find really good jujitsu instruction because in a small town, like the best jujitsu instructors are going to go to big cities, and then they're going to train in big cities and going to learn from other guys in big cities. Whereas in a rural area, maybe there's one guy. Actually, since living rurally, like I end up teaching a lot, even though I'm still a beginner because So that is like kind of a big trade off. But what have you ever heard of distributism? It's a
Distributism.
philosophy. It's an economic philosophy that didn't catch on for various reasons, but it was like an alternative to socialism or capitalism, where the idea is that the state issues every family the amount of land and wealth that they can sustain themselves. So it's not like socialism where they give them wealth, or capitalism where everyone's out for themselves. It's like the term coined by G.K. Chesterton was 3 acres and a cow. Like if every family could have 3 acres and a cow, they would never starve. They might not get rich. If they want to make more money or advance themselves, they have to use their ambition, but everyone would be set. But it's not the kind of set where they get welfare. It's the kind of set where they do need to work for their own food because they have the means of food, right? They have land and they have a cow. And the idea was that this is like the most direct way for fulfillment for the masses, as opposed to socialism, which incentivizes sloth, and capitalism, where there's a great wealth disparity. So I think it's really interesting. There's obviously no government that would go for this because when people are self-sustaining, they don't contribute to the you know the supply, the more globalized or nationalized supply chain. Like they're not going to advance the collective. But I've been kind of taking this on as like kind of developing a personal philosophy of like, maybe I'll call it auto distributism, where the aim for everyone should be able to have like their own self-sustaining manner, let's say, right? Because it is so, and especially for men, I think it's so fulfilling to work on your own property and generate things for your family in a way that actually I don't even think, like, even if you get really high paid computer work or whatever digital things, which gives you other freedoms, it doesn't hit the fulfillment circuit the same way as like building a roof or like working the land, right? Like that hits it directly. That's what we evolved. That's how we evolved to experience fulfillment as men, to like put out physical effort and come back with meat or food somehow.
Yeah, that gets me wondering. The computer guy you're talking about is basically an example of myself, and I imagine how would I fare if you put me out in the jungle with my wife and maybe a kid, and I don't know how much. Maybe in that scenario, my survival instincts would gear up, but I think a lot of this urbanized work or societal structures is taken away from men, especially to um, so they don't have much survival skills. That I would say versus people out there. And you're right. I've volunteered in the past building houses, helping out in farming. Just the fulfillment and nourishment that comes from it, and then you provide it to someone else. It's far outreaching than going out to a store and buying a couple of pounds of fruits and bringing it to a party. So yeah,
Yeah.
I feel you on
But
that.
it's also, I mean, this trade-offs with everything, right? Like you're actually, if you did want to switch tracks, you're in a better position than say the farmer who wants to switch into urban life where he can amass a certain amount of wealth. It's like the self-sustaining, person is never going to really accumulate wealth in that system, which is why most of the world switched to the other system. You could switch back though, right? Like you can save a bunch of money, assume you have like your job pays well. You could go to Bangladesh or some other city or other country where the cost of living is low and learn all the skills you want to learn if you wanted to. So, you know, yeah, everything's
Yeah,
got, there's a trade-off with everything.
absolutely, absolutely. But yes, no. The reason I said that is because I observe, like, other people in tech as well. Because if you are in this society, you are always out. If you have the capitalistic mindset, it's always like you are hitting the circuit in your brain that wants to sort of obviously develop the self, but also capture more resources and more resources, not taking into account the consequences or the second or third order consequences that might not be in your psyche. Um, but I've also seen people who can, balance that out. Nature, city, having the right balance and having the right teachers, even if you did not know, don't have the skills, but have the drive to go out and learn them, maybe in different communities with, going to different retreats or schools, learning a bit about construction or farming, about
Yeah.
nature, about hunting, making fire, things like that.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, if you have money saved, you can try things out and go back. And I actually have a client who worked in tech for a number of years and had a very high paying job. Wasn't fulfilling. He decided he wanted to be an artist, or maybe, he started learning welding, and he worked like in a machine shop for way less than, he was making when he worked in tech. And actually I was doing research for him because he was like trying to figure out like what to do. And I actually found this community online of former computer programmers who became truck drivers. And apparently it's like a kind of a big thing of guys who retired switching from company to company, which I guess is the norm in the field. I don't know myself. And they just wanted to work, do something physical. They wanted to they save their brain power for things that they actually wanted to think about. And it's like this big, I had no idea. It was like, it's like a huge community online of guys like this, which is really interesting. But you could always switch back and forth. You can take a trade job for a year, go back, there's a lot of options for someone.
It's
Specifically, if
funny.
you start off with a high paying job and you have money, and that gives you freedom.
It's funny. I did fantasize about being a truck driver. We're in state highway, and I see this long as trucks driving, and like, damn, it takes a lot of skill to move that thing, to turn that thing, and to travel. But yeah,
Yeah, and there's
it's
something, I think it's pretty close to be like kind of being the lonesome cowboy, like to be on the road by yourself with your thoughts, and you're doing something physical and you're moving literal weights from point A to point B. Like I think that also comes a little bit closer to hitting that like primal masculine uh fulfillment circuit. Like I don't know if we've spoken about this before, but I worked as a taxi driver for almost a year. And I wouldn't do I mean I wouldn't do it again as like my primary thing, but it was the one of the best experiences. Eventually, I decided not to do it anymore. I went back to coaching, but like it was so great to just do something physical, to interact with people. I got paid for my time. Basically, I got paid for my time, and it was like this straightforward thing. And I felt like my brain was free to think about whatever I wanted, which was great. Which is something I didn't experience in office jobs, which is why I didn't last very long.
hmm, okay. So another, I think we spoke about this topic before. I want to go really deep into Carl Jung and some of his philosophies. He's well known mostly for his, like, initially for his shadows, or a study of the different shadows and the different layers of subconscious. Would you be able to sort of highlight some of his um, fundamental teachings or philosophies that relate to human potential?
Well, the one that has been most impactful for me, that people are familiar with, is the concept of archetypes. Like this idea that in the same way that we have patterns in our genome that get passed on through, natural selection, we also have patterns in our psyche that get passed on, whether it's through our biology or through, cultural exchange. Like somehow we have these patterns, and these patterns make up our personality. And we label them in certain ways: hero, warrior, the Gillette and Moore labelings of king, warrior, magician, lover for the so-called male archetypes. But just conceptually, the idea of archetypes, I think, is so useful because so much of human behavior is actually not rational. Like a lot of kind of personal development is based on this, right? Like if you could just act confident, and or be attractive or be charming, no one would ever study, interpersonal relationships, or you know, so much of our financial success or career success or creative ability comes from kind of these patterns, right? Like a lot of our behavior is not driven by our rationality. We make decisions with our mind, but like kind of in key moments, we fall back on these patterns of behavior. So yeah, I think it's very interesting looking at these things of like what you have like in your makeup. Like if you just imagine like you have these kind of programs downloaded into your operating system, or into the computer that is you. Like what are these patterns? Maybe some of these are viruses they want to remove. Like why do I have this kind of submissive pattern in certain as an example, like why do I back down from conflict, or why do I shy away from criticism, or why do I have a weird relationship with money, or maybe the mother stuff, like these imprints, right? Like why do I have a weird relationship with women, or have this pattern, and looking at like how those things can be solved, and almost characterizing them in the way that most people talk about archetypes, I think is very interesting and useful.
Hmm. And there's I've heard about so many different archetypes. You have I don't know if like through is he the first one, or the first pioneer coining the word archetype? Because
Yeah.
these days you have, it has evolved. You have, I'm sure he did not, maybe he did Like you have the warrior archetype, you have the lover archetype.
I don't know that he labeled them in this way. I mean, there's certain terms like the anima
No,
is one of
these
his
are the ones
terms.
that people speak about these days.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure he did not. He had his own terminology. Um, like for instance, the hero archetype that relates to the human growth, the human potential, and our purpose, or falling back to the hero's journey. Um, we sort of have a normal life, or sometimes subdued life, and then there's a calling, or there's a suffering. Go low, and then you hear the calling, but then that you have to fight your inner demons, or internal or external circumstances that sort of bind you, not expressing your full potential. And somehow you invoke the fire within, and then you go out into the journey, into the wild, facing your shadows. So that is a really fascinating topic to me. I want to hear about your thoughts on that.
On the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's again, I mean, Joseph Campbell is the one who like
Hmm.
labeled it or coined it as the monomyth by looking at many different mythologies. And yeah, the idea is that it resonates with us, and you see the story structure across cultures and mythologies, and now it's like repurposed in many movies, and every Marvel movie is exactly scene by scene the same thing. For this reason, is that it mirrors one of these patterns within us that we evolved to have of how we confront challenge and experience inner growth. And that's why it appeals to us. That's why, even though every Marvel movie is exactly the same structure, it can be entertaining because it hits those buttons, Um, yeah. And, and I also like looking at what people are drawn to as entertainment is, and this is like a Jungian idea that if you're attracted to a certain kind of story structure, a certain kind of fiction, it's likely because your psyche wants you to go on that journey. So you're like, people who are really obsessed with Marvel movies probably want to go on uh, a typical hero's journey. They want to leave their status quo. Maybe they keep watching the Marvel movie because they're not doing it themselves. Perhaps, actually, I did a recent episode on um, because Pornhub releases their data every year, which is kind of like it's interesting to look at like what men are clicking on or searching for, getting off to, and MILF rose to the number two. In recent years, it's been trending up. So, I took the Jungian idea, I took this concept, this hypothesis that men of all ages are searching for MILF more than ever, not because it's about sex, not because it's like some weird thing that people have with their moms, as much as it's actually the mother complex, Jung's concept, the mother complex of adult men nowadays feel like boys. Even grown men, 30 years old, 40 years old, they feel like a boy. So they're drawn to this, like when they want to, you know, jerk off to pornography, they're drawn to this kind of story structure of like an overpowering female. It's not really about sex. It's that it's almost like their unconscious is using sex to show them a certain thing that they want to complete. Because I this is it's my theory based on having spoken to many men about their fantasies and inner world and what they're attracted to. I don't think men who really see themselves as a grown man or a father figure have this kind of fantasy about women. It's guys who still see themselves as a boy, and they still want the approval from the archetypal feminine, their internal mother figure, which is why they're drawn to MILF stuff as opposed to, as opposed to like a guy who's completed that cycle a long time ago.
Hmm. That's super interesting.
Well, I think there is an evolutionary um, a basis for this. Like if you're a 16-year-old guy, you're going through puberty, you're new to this stuff, you can imagine in a totally free, let's say pre-civilization tribal culture, such a young man might be particularly drawn to say a 40-year-old woman who's done having kids, who, you know, wants to teach him the ways of love, right? Who wants to give him like a secure, woman for him to learn how to be a man with, metaphorically, as opposed to like fumbling around with other 16-year-old girls his age, right? It kind of makes sense that that would be something hardwired into us, is like something in that stage of life we would seek as a means for growth, in the same way that the 16-year-old boy also wants to go do reckless physical things and wants to fight and wants to build his body and seek grandeur. Those, it makes sense. I think it becomes a pathology when a 30-year-old man still has that fantasy, or a 40-year-old man has that fantasy, right? It's
Yeah.
like he didn't quite grow up. It's like the fantasy was maybe healthy when he was 15, 16, 19, but at some point he should have gotten that education and grown up. And you see a lot of like male fetishes, or things that guys are drawn to. Like, you can usually tie it to something that maybe has nothing to do with sex. It's something about a stage of development that he wants to go through. In the same way, like I think someone who's really lived a hero's journey, like maybe someone who, like a Medal of Honor winner, like just someone who's like totally been a hero in his real life, I would guess he's not that into Spider-Man, or it doesn't like move him in the way that like the comic book nerd is, where you like think of this stereotypical person who's obsessed with Marvel movies. And I know I'm speaking in sweeping generalizations, so maybe people will get mad at me saying this, and maybe it's false in many cases, but I would imagine someone who's really drawn to that stuff, it's because his psyche still wants him to go on that journey. Like the man who still is attracted to milfs, or like these like approval giving female figures, still feels like he hasn't gotten it yet, as opposed to the guy who went through that cycle as a literal adolescent, and now he's moving on to other things.
Mhm. Okay. And just speaking of superhero movies, I mean, I do watch a lot of superhero movies when I get from time to time, but the one still, one of my favorites is the Dark Knight series by Christopher
Christopher
Nolan.
Nolan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really that the hero's journey depicted with the central character, that is Batman, Bruce Wayne, somehow sort of relates to me. It made it the movie made it more humane. It's not like, yeah, your superhero, the powers were just given to you, like, a spider bit you and then you suddenly started
Yeah,
to
Batman had to earn
so
it.
exactly, yeah, yeah, there was something
Yeah.
really appealing to me.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, the movie I really liked was the second one with Heath Ledger, because it showed it wasn't like I'm very judgmental of like the typical Marvel movies, because it makes things so black and white, good and evil. Like, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, which is not really reality, even though it's reinforced in our culture. Like, if you look at some of the political issues, or any political issue, like, people frame it as if it's a Marvel movie. Oh, our side, our party's the good guys, or our country's the good guys, they're the bad guys, which is not reality, right? And the Heath Ledger movie was so great because it really showed complex ethical dilemmas. And actually, the one I really love, and this is maybe speaking to my own psyche and the journey that I've been drawn to, is Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie. Like, where it's like so dark. It's one of the only movies I've seen multiple times in theaters as an adult, because I don't know, I'm just so, it really spoke. I think the journey he went through really appealed to like my adolescence, like kind of that darkness, and going into delusions and seeking delusions of grandeur, but also like delusions of romance, and seeking a father, strong male presence. Like, all of those things really touched me. And I think, people label it as the incel movie because it speaks so much to guys who society kind of treats as non-persons. Anyway, I don't know how I got on this, but like, yeah, what the kind of fiction we're drawn to, I think, reveals something strong about our psyches.
Hmm. And that is the whole one of the thesis of Carl Jung. um, I mean, and he has many different works. Correct. I think at one point in his life he retreated to a cabin in the forest, and he came up with which I have not read. Friends recommended. It's, I forget the name. The Red Book.
The Red Book, yeah.
Red
Yeah,
Book.
it's it's quite cryptic. I haven't completed it. I've read maybe a third of it. Um, yeah, he was quite prolific. He wrote a lot of books. I mean, I think also back then, since there was no internet, a lot of his books, you can see like he's kind of working out ideas. Now when someone writes a book, it's kind of like anyway, my point is like he wrote a lot of his ideas down, and like he has so many books written because he was doing constant research and learning new things and publishing ideas and etc.
Yeah, he was one of a kind, and he did it without the use of any external substances. He entered this altered states of consciousness just through. I mean, it's really hard to deduce the reality he is seeing, but I would say he's one of a kind. Not, I mean, at the same, his contemporary Albert Hoffman. I'm not sure if it's the same timeline. Synthesized LSD and began
Hmm.
his own journey in Switzerland.
Yeah.
But him just entering these states just through the sheer power of his will, intellect, mind, and maybe a few other factors that scientists are not able to pinpoint to. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
as
actually, I
a
mean, one of his exercises that he recommended to people, he called active imagination, which in itself is not particularly mystical. It's like you actively are imagining things and noticing what symbols pop up, as opposed to like if you try to imagine a certain scene or a certain future or imagine what's going on in your psyche, what kinds of things show up, right? And I think it's kind of a gateway to mysticism. I have a guided meditation that's similar to that in my masculine archetype program. It's like imagine certain things and see what actually shows up in your psyche. It's like almost like dreaming awake. And if you can really get into like really put your attention inwards and get into that, it can kind of feel like a gateway into mysticism where it's kind of like you're dreaming. It's kind of, I'll say when I've done this and really focused, it has felt like the experience of being half asleep, where you're conscious and awake and lucid, but you're also getting symbols, or like you're half dreaming, like you're getting, you're kind of interacting with your dreams for that experience. And I would imagine he just did it to like a very, you know, intense degree. Um, Especially when he was writing the Red Book, where he was getting, like these kind of downloads, let's say.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom. I know you have to pick up your daughter from school, I believe. Is that
No, no, I have to put her to bed.
y- you have to? Oh yes,
Yeah,
it's yeah. It's like, oh yeah, you're in. It's almost 6. No one stays
yeah.
till 6 at school. But
Yeah, she
it
goes to
was.
bed around the sunset, which over here right now is around 6.
That's how we humans are supposed to. I mean, naturally, right when the sun is down,
Yeah.
dial down our systems. Um, I mean, I know we can talk about this topic of nature, living in nature versus in cities, but it was a pleasure having you on. And we spoke of a different range of topics. But is there something else that missed out? You want to express or uh, tell my audience about maybe your work?
Well, just like, I guess a call to action, if you if you work remote or have the potential to work remote, regardless of your situation, I would even say, especially if you have a family, try living rurally for a bit, rurally with internet, and just see how it affects you. Because obviously there's trade-offs, and there's things I miss about being closer to the global supply chain. Like I can't get Amazon packages delivered where I live, but that's like kind of a small inconvenience to pay for the immense benefits. So yeah, that's my call to action to everyone. Try living really out there for a bit.
That's a great advice, and I'm gonna think about it. Thank you. I think I got some creative ideas right on the onset of this conversation. Thank you so much, Ruan. It was a pleasure having you, and I wish you all the best, living in Peru, and building your family, gathering more resources, and gathering more bunnies as well.
Yeah. Thanks,
All
bro.
right. Thank you so much. Let me hit stop.